deep in the Vietnamese jungle, where death waited behind every tree and survival meant thinking 3 steps ahead of your enemy, one small man from Hawaii was rewriting the rules of warfare. Standing barely 5 feet tall and weighing only 125 pounds, he looked nothing like the typical American war hero. Yet this unlikely warrior would become the most fearless ranger of the Vietnam War, leading over 1,000 battles without a single scratch to any man under his command. His story defies everything you think you know about combat, courage, and what it really takes to bring soldiers home alive. The secret behind his impossible success remained largely unspoken of outside the military for decades, until now. The street kid who became a legend. Before Patrick Gavin Tadina became the most fearless ranger of the Vietnam War, he was just a troublemaker on the streets of Hawaii. Born in 1942, this small kid with Filipino, Chinese, German, Irish, and Hawaiian blood running through his veins was always getting into fights and causing problems. Tad wasn't your typical future war hero. He was barely 5 feet tall and weighed only 125 pounds, about the size of a middle school kid. But what he lacked in size, he made up for in street smarts and pure determination. Growing up in Honolulu, he ran with the wrong crowd and even got involved in drug running as a teenager. By the time he was 20, Tad faced a choice that would change his life forever. The courts gave him an ultimatum: go to prison or join the military. Most people would have been terrified, but Tad saw this as his chance to prove himself. He chose the Army, not knowing that this decision would lead him to become one of the most decorated soldiers in American history. What made Tad different from other recruits wasn't his size or his background. It was something deeper. Even as a young man, he had this strange ability to sense danger before it happened. His friends back home used to say he could smell trouble coming from miles away. Little did they know that this gift would one day save the lives of hundreds of soldiers in the jungles of Vietnam. The transformation from street kid to soldier wasn't easy. Military training pushed Tad harder than anything he'd experienced on the streets. But every challenge only made him stronger. His small size, which had always made him a target for bullies, suddenly became an advantage. He could move quietly, hide easily, and most importantly, he looked like he belonged in the places where bigger soldiers would stick out like a sore thumb. The making of a ghost. When Tad enlisted in the Army in 1962, nobody expected much from the small Hawaiian kid. But from day one, he showed something special. During basic training, while other recruits struggled with the physical demands, Tad seemed to glide through every challenge like it was a game. His instructors quickly noticed that he had skills you couldn't teach in any classroom. He could move through the woods without making a sound, spot enemies hiding in places others couldn't see, and most remarkably, he never seemed to panic under pressure. When other soldiers would freeze up during combat exercises, Tad would stay calm and think clearly. The Army recognized Tad's potential and sent him for specialized training. This wasn't ordinary soldier training. This was preparation to become a ranger, one of the military's most elite fighters. Only about 25% of candidates who try to become rangers actually make it through the brutal selection process. Most guys quit or get kicked out because they can't handle the pressure. But Tad thrived on pressure. The harder the training got, the better he performed. He learned to survive in the wilderness for weeks with almost no supplies. He mastered weapons that most soldiers never even get to see. And most importantly, he developed the mental toughness needed to lead other men into the most dangerous situations imaginable. What set Tad apart wasn't just his individual skills. It was his ability to see the bigger picture. While other trainees focused on following orders, Tad was already thinking like a leader. He studied his fellow soldiers, learned their strengths and weaknesses, and figured out how to bring out the best in everyone around him. By 1965, Tad was ready for his first real combat mission. He was assigned to the Dominican Republic with the 82nd Airborne Division, where he got his first taste of what it meant to fight for real. But this was just the warm-up. The real test was coming, and it would take place in the jungles of Vietnam, where Tad would begin building a reputation that would make him a legend. First steps into the jungle of death. In 1966, Tadina stepped off a transport plane into the humid, suffocating heat of Vietnam. The air was thick enough to cut with a knife, and the jungle stretched endlessly in every direction. This wasn't like any battlefield American soldiers had ever faced before. The enemy could be anywhere or nowhere. They could be the farmer working in a rice field during the day, and the sniper taking shots at you that same night. Most new soldiers were terrified of the Vietnamese jungle. The thick vegetation made it impossible to see more than a few feet in any direction. Strange sounds echoed through the trees day and night. And somewhere out there, an enemy who knew every trail, every hiding spot, every trick for staying invisible was waiting to kill them. But Tad felt right at home. His small size and dark complexion, which came from his mixed heritage, made him look like a local Vietnamese person. This wasn't just lucky genetics. It was going to become his secret weapon in the war ahead. Tad was assigned to the 173rd Airborne Brigade's Long-Range Reconnaissance Patrol Unit. These weren't regular soldiers who stayed in big bases with lots of backup. LRRP teams were small groups of 4 to 6 men who went deep behind enemy lines to gather information and cause trouble for the enemy. It was the most dangerous job in Vietnam, and most soldiers who volunteered for it didn't come back alive. On his very first patrol, Tad showed why he was different. While his team leader was planning their route through the jungle, Tad quietly studied the terrain and spotted something that didn't look right. There was a path that seemed too convenient, too easy to follow. His gut told him it was a trap. When he mentioned his concerns to his team leader, the older soldier initially brushed him off. After all, Tad was the new guy who had never seen real combat in Vietnam. But something in Tad's voice made him take a second look. Sure enough, the path led straight into an enemy ambush that would have killed them all. From that moment on, everyone knew Tadina was special. He had something you couldn't train or teach, a sixth sense for danger that kept him and his teammates alive when others would have walked straight into death. The point man who never missed. Being the point man on a patrol means you walk first into unknown territory. You're the one who steps on the hidden landmines. You're the one who gets shot at first when the enemy opens fire. You're basically a human target, testing every step to see if death is waiting there. Most soldiers hated being on point, and with good reason. Point men had the highest casualty rate in Vietnam. But Tadina volunteered for the point position on every single mission. It wasn't because he had a death wish or because he was trying to show off. It was because he had developed an almost supernatural ability to sense danger before anyone else could see it coming. His teammates started calling him Ghost, because he seemed to move through the jungle like he wasn't quite human. Tad's approach to being the point man was completely different from that of other soldiers. Instead of trying to spot enemies from a distance, he would actually get close enough to touch them. His citations describe him walking to within feet of enemies he knew were lying in wait for him. This sounds completely crazy, but Tad had a system that worked every single time. He would study the enemy's body language and positioning to determine exactly what they were planning. Then, instead of backing away quietly, he would lead them straight into traps that his team had prepared. The enemy would think they were chasing one scared American soldier, but they were actually being led to their own destruction. One of Tad's most incredible abilities was his talent for mimicking local Vietnamese people. Remember, he was only 5 feet 5 inches and weighed 125 pounds, with dark skin and Asian features from his mixed heritage. When he wore black clothes and sandals instead of his military uniform, and carried an AK-47 instead of American weapons, even enemy soldiers would mistake him for one of their own allies. This disguise allowed Tad to walk right through enemy camps and gather information that no other American soldier could get. He could count their weapons, listen to their plans, and figure out exactly where they would strike next. But the most amazing part was how he used this information to set up ambushes that seemed impossible. The enemy would think they were attacking a small group of American soldiers, but Tad had already called in artillery strikes and air support to the exact spots where he knew they would be. By the time the shooting started, the battle was already over. The mission that should have been impossible. One night in 1968, Tad received orders for a mission that seemed like a suicide run. Intelligence reports suggested that American prisoners of war were being held in an enemy hospital deep in Viet Cong territory. The facility was heavily guarded, surrounded by hostile forces, and located in an area where no American soldier had ever returned alive. Most commanders would have sent a large team with heavy weapons and air support for a mission like this. But Tad convinced his superiors to let him go alone. He argued that a single man had a better chance of getting in and out undetected than a whole squad of soldiers who would make noise and attract attention. Armed with only a silenced .22 pistol and wearing his Vietnamese disguise, Tad slipped into the jungle as darkness fell. The hospital was a concrete building that had been damaged by previous bombing runs, creating holes in the walls that would serve as his entry points. Getting there meant traveling through miles of territory controlled by the enemy, where a single wrong step could mean capture or death. Tad moved through the jungle like a shadow, avoiding enemy patrols and hidden sentries. His years of experience had taught him to read the jungle like a book. He could tell from the way birds stopped singing where enemy soldiers were hiding. He could detect the smell of cigarette smoke from hundreds of yards away. Most importantly, he could sense when something felt wrong, even if he couldn't see or hear anything dangerous. When he reached the hospital, Tad discovered that the building was nearly empty. Most of the rooms contained nothing but broken equipment and overturned beds. But there was still one guard posted near a door that might have led to where prisoners were being held. Using his silenced pistol, Tad eliminated the guard without making a sound. Room by room, he searched the entire facility, but found no American prisoners. The intelligence had been wrong, or the prisoners had been moved to another location. But instead of considering the mission a failure, Tad gathered valuable information about enemy medical facilities and supply routes that would help other American forces plan future operations. The most remarkable part of this mission wasn't what Tad found. It was how he got home safely. During his return journey, he had to avoid several enemy patrols that were actively searching for whoever had infiltrated their hospital. But once again, his ghost-like ability to move unseen brought him back to American lines without a single scratch. The day death almost caught the ghost. Even though Tad seemed invincible, Vietnam was a place where death could find anyone, anytime, anywhere. In 1969, during what should have been a routine reconnaissance mission, Tad finally met his match. But the way he handled this life-or-death situation would become one of the most legendary stories in Ranger history. Tad was leading his team through dense jungle when his sixth sense started screaming warnings at him. Something was wrong, but he couldn't figure out exactly what. The jungle looked normal, sounded normal, even smelled normal. But every instinct he had developed over years of combat was telling him that danger was very close. As the point man, Tad was walking several yards ahead of his team when he spotted movement in the trees. He had walked straight into an enemy ambush, exactly the kind of trap that had killed thousands of American soldiers throughout the war. But here's where Tad's story becomes almost unbelievable. The enemy soldiers saw him coming and had their weapons ready to fire. They should have killed him instantly. But when they looked at this small, dark-skinned man wearing black clothes like theirs and carrying an AK-47, they hesitated. For just a few seconds, they weren't sure if he was an American soldier or one of their own fighters who had gotten lost. Those few seconds of confusion saved Tad's life and gave him the chance to react. Instead of running away or diving for cover like most soldiers would do, Tad did something completely unexpected. He opened fire first and shouted warnings to his teammates, even though this would definitely give away his position to the enemy. The ambush erupted into chaos as both sides started shooting. Tad was hit twice in his legs, with bullets tearing through both of his calves. The pain was incredible. He later said that when he cut his pants off to treat the wounds, his calf muscle was hanging down to his ankles. Most men would have been screaming for help or trying to crawl to safety. But Tad refused medical aid and continued commanding his team throughout the entire battle. He called in artillery strikes on enemy positions while bleeding heavily from his wounds. He coordinated his team's movements to make sure everyone got out alive, and he didn't let himself be evacuated until every single one of his men was safely back at base. This mission earned Tad his second Silver Star, one of the military's highest awards for bravery. But more importantly, It proved that even when death finally caught up with the ghost of Vietnam, he was still more concerned about his teammates than his own survival. The secret behind never losing a man. By 1970, Tadina had accomplished something that seemed impossible in Vietnam. Over nearly 5 years of continuous combat, leading more than 1,000 dangerous missions deep behind enemy lines, he had never lost a single man under his command. Not one. In a war where Ranger teams were getting wiped out regularly, Tad's record was nothing short of miraculous. So what was his secret? How did a 125-pound man from Hawaii manage to keep all of his soldiers alive in the deadliest conflict of their generation? The answer wasn't magic or luck. It was a combination of incredible preparation, iron discipline, and a leadership style that put his men's lives above everything else, including his own safety. First, Tad planned every mission down to the smallest detail. While other team leaders might spend a few hours studying maps and intelligence reports, Tad would spend days preparing for a single patrol. He would study weather patterns, enemy movement schedules, local terrain features, and backup extraction points. He had contingency plans for his contingency plans. But planning was only part of the equation. Tad also had an unshakable rule. He never asked his men to do anything he wouldn't do himself. As one of his former teammates said, Tad was always the first one in and the last one out. If there was a dangerous river to cross, Tad crossed it first. If there was a suspicious trail to investigate, Tad investigated it first. If someone had to stay behind to cover the team's retreat, Tad stayed behind. This leadership style earned him something that can't be taught in any military school: absolute trust. His men knew that Tad would die before he would let anything happen to them, and because they trusted him completely, they followed his orders without question, even when those orders seemed crazy or impossible. Tad also had a special instinct for danger. Time and again, he would suddenly change course or call off a mission because something felt wrong. His men learned to trust these instincts completely, even when they couldn't see any obvious danger. Years later, they would discover that Tad's hunches had saved them from hidden landmines, enemy ambushes, and artillery strikes that would have killed them all. The statistics of Tad's service record tell an amazing story. Out of over 1,000 missions, 85% achieved their objectives without any enemy contact at all. This meant that Tad was so good at moving undetected through hostile territory that the enemy never even knew American soldiers had been there. The remaining 15% of missions that did involve combat were handled so professionally that American casualties were practically zero. The price of being a legend. Success in Vietnam came with a terrible personal cost for Tadina. While he was saving the lives of American soldiers and building his reputation as an invincible warrior, tragedy struck his own family in the cruelest possible way. His older brother, who had insisted on joining the fight despite Tad's advice against it, was killed in action after only 3 months in Vietnam. This loss hit Tad harder than any enemy bullet ever could. His brother's death violated everything Tad believed about protecting the people you care about. He had spent years keeping other men's brothers, sons, and fathers alive, but he couldn't save his own family member. The guilt and anger from this tragedy would haunt him for the rest of his life. Making things worse, there was a military policy that should have prevented this tragedy from happening. If a family already had one son serving in a combat zone, other sons could request to avoid combat duty. But Tad's brother had refused this protection because he wanted to fight alongside his little brother. His death meant that Tad was now the sole surviving male in his family. When Tad returned to Hawaii for his brother's funeral, his mother begged him not to go back to Vietnam. She had already lost one son to the war and couldn't bear the thought of losing another. The family even tried to have Tad arrested to prevent him from returning to combat, arguing that as the last male family member, he should stay home. But Tad couldn't abandon his men. He had soldiers in Vietnam who depended on him to keep them alive. In his mind, staying home safe while they faced danger without him would have been the worst kind of betrayal. So he escaped from the family's attempts to keep him in Hawaii and returned to the war, even though it meant breaking his mother's heart. The enemy had also taken notice of Tad's incredible success rate. The Viet Cong and North Vietnamese army put a bounty on his head. They wanted the ghost of Vietnam captured or killed so badly that they were willing to pay a reward to whoever could accomplish it. For Tad, this bounty became a badge of honor. It proved that his work was making a real difference in the war. By the time Tad left Vietnam in July 1970, he had become the longest continuously serving Ranger in the entire conflict. He was also one of the most decorated enlisted soldiers in American military history, with 22 awards including 2 Silver Stars, 10 Bronze Stars, 4 Army Commendation Medals, and 3 Purple Hearts. But the number that mattered most to him was still 0. 0 men lost under his command in over 1,000 missions. The legend lives forever. When Tad Tadina finally left the jungles of Vietnam in 1970, many people thought his fighting days were over. But the man who had survived 1,000 battles without losing a single soldier wasn't ready to retire just yet. His incredible skills and experience were too valuable to waste, and America would call on him again when new conflicts arose around the world. In 1983, Tad joined the invasion of Grenada as part of Operation Urgent Fury. At 41 years old, he was considered an old man by military standards, but his expertise was desperately needed. The operation was a success, and once again, Tad proved that his abilities hadn't diminished with age. 8 years later, he deployed to the Persian Gulf for Operation Desert Storm, where his reconnaissance skills helped American forces achieve a quick victory over Iraqi forces. After retiring from active duty in 1992 with 30 years of service, most soldiers would have been content to enjoy a peaceful retirement. But Tad wasn't most soldiers. He continued working as a civilian contractor, training air marshals and special operations forces. His job took him to some of the most dangerous places on Earth, including Afghanistan, Iraq, and Pakistan. Even in his 60s, Tad was still teaching younger warriors how to stay alive in combat. In 1995, Tad received the ultimate recognition for his service when he was inducted into the Ranger Hall of Fame at Fort Benning. The citation praised his extreme valor and noted that he had never lost a man under his command during his years as a team leader in Vietnam. This honor placed him among the greatest Rangers in American military history. But Tad never let fame go to his head. He remained humble and always deflected praise to his fellow Rangers. As one military historian wrote, Tad Tadina set the standard for what a Ranger should be. His tactical brilliance, his dedication to his men, and his unwavering courage in the face of overwhelming odds made him a legend in his own time. When Tad passed away on May 29, 2020, at the age of 77, he left behind a legacy that will inspire future generations of American soldiers. His daughter said that in his final years, when dementia began affecting his memory, he often believed he was back in the Army with his buddies. Even at the very end, his heart belonged to the Rangers who had served beside him in the jungles of Vietnam. The most fearless Ranger of the Vietnam War had fought 1,000 battles without losing a single man under his command. But perhaps more importantly, he had shown that heroism doesn't come from being the biggest or strongest person in the room. Sometimes it comes from being the one who cares most about bringing everyone else home safely. What amazed you the most about Tad? That he survived over 1,000 missions, or that he never lost a single teammate? Let us hear your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.